afternoon. We're so grateful that you're here today, and for those who will be watching on video. I'm Virginia Gruba from Services for Students with Disabilities. I'm an academic coach and disability specialist, and we have a very special treat. We have Geraldine Markle, with us today. Geraldine is an educational psychologist and specialist working with individuals with all disabilities and working on success strategies. And so we're so delighted. I will let her share more of her accomplishments. But without further ado, Jerry, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Virginia. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Jerry Markle. I'm an educational psychologist, principal of Managing Your Mind coaching and seminars, and I function as an academic coach. And my focus is on learning and performance. And in this seminar series, we're looking at a number of study skills, and today we're focusing on listening and note-taking. Like reading and test-taking, these study skills are frequently neglected in terms of direct teaching, of having strategies in the system, and really hooking up one component of the educational situation to the next, which is test-taking and improvement in grades. So today, we're talking about effective listening and noteworthy note-taking. And we want to really think about what it is you want to get out of a lecture. Because when you have good listening skills, you set the stage for enhanced learning within the lecture. And so the more you learn in the lecture, the better will be your memory, and the easier it is then to review and use the information later for test-taking, for paper writing, or for participating. And we want to think of being in a lecture and listening as having a peak performance. That is, you understand your skills. Are you a great listener? Are you better with visual details? Do you get fidgety? Are you able to concentrate? What are the components within your study self that make you able to listen better and learn better within a lecture? The next kind of component you want to think of is, what is the task? The task is learning. The task is not just listening or taking notes, but the task is, what am I learning in that lecture? And when you define that in terms of, I need some detailed information for multiple choice tests, I need big ideas for essay questions, I need integration because I have to write a 15-page paper, I need to be conversant with the facts and the main ideas because I'm making a presentation or doing a project. So once you have a goal and you understand what the task is, the end task, you can then design strategies to help you learn more effectively. And the last component of a high-performance system is when you decide what setting enables your listening. So you may know that you are best and can pay best attention when you're sitting in the front seat, or you may identify times during which you should look at your lecture, review the lecture notes, but you're doing it in a coffee shop, and for organic chemistry, that's too busy a place. You really need a cubicle. Whereas if you're dealing with your strengths, you might not be so bothered with the setting. So we want to look for a peak performance in listening, note-taking, and then applying that information. We also want to look at what some aids are to facilitate note-taking and review, and what a number of strategies are. We frequently think, or don't think, about listening as a way of communicating within our social scene as it relates to academics. So how well are we listening and interacting when we're at office hours or when we're having casual conversations with peers about a topic? What's the study group like? And then more specifically in a lecture. And so listening comprises a huge amount, maybe 40% of the amount of learning that we do through listening. The other major aspect of communication and learning has to do with speaking. So many students benefit from talking about the content, for identifying the main idea, for having a framework within their perceptual view that I have to do a main idea, I have to do a further explanation, I have to do a fact, I have to have an example. And once they have this framework, when they're speaking, they become more organized and they're able to absorb the content. So talking about the main ideas of a lecture and then filtering down to what some specific details are and how examples are used throughout is one way of enhancing the amount that you get out of a lecture. So having a discussion group right after the lecture would be very useful. If we think about how much learning we actually do between reading and writing, we see that that's less effective in terms of how much we learn when we're doing these functions than listening or speaking. And what we want to think about is how can we gain better control? How can we become more confident? Because once we become more confident, we end up being able to have less stress and having better attention and memory. One of the things that's useful to do is to identify any patterns that you have. So it may be that you say, I'm a great listener, but it may be that other people are having some habits, maybe more in one course than another, where they are not effective listeners. And it may be that you can attend really well at the beginning, and then your attention sort of wanders as you get into the lecture. It may be that you need some time to warm up, maybe you're doodling, maybe you need to come to class a little early just to relax, get on target. So you want to look at what is your pattern, is your attention and focus for with little bits. So you're only really attending for 10 minutes at a time. Whatever it is, you need to work with that pattern and you need to understand. Another thing that helps memory and understanding is to preview the material. So many people are just thinking, oh, I gotta get through that lecture. Oh. They don't do anything prior to the lecture. Well, if you are a novice in a particular content area, you need a little heads up about the vocabulary, the main ideas, some of the examples. And so if you list that I never preview or survey the material prior to the lecture, you're going in maybe with one ear covered. And so you want to expand you want to expand the amount of time you spend preparing for a lecture. If you do 0 now, you might start with just 10 or 20 minutes and just be able to survey the material. So using a list, a checklist, helps us identify where we could ratchet up. Frequently, students do not have much control over the lecture. They don't choose the room. They are not responsible for the lecturer's style, how rapid the speech is, how much gesturing or walking around, how many times the person summarizes, how many slides there are, how detailed the slides are, how quickly the slides go. So students don't have a lot of control over those factors, but they do have more control about the things that they do have control over. So whether they preview before is under their control. Whether they are ready to listen and have some questions to answer, that's within their control. Whether they go to office hours if they don't understand something, that's within their control. So students need to think, after looking at a self-check, what types of things are under their control, which things can be improved upon, perhaps with a specific strategy, and when do I need to buddy up with somebody, maybe using somebody else's notes or working with the GSI or instructor. In our social situations, we really want to think about how well we're communicating in order to define what we have to do, how we have to do it, when it's due, nuances about how grading is set up. So you know that within a social context, perhaps with peers or at networking gathering, there are some people who just sort of look like they're ignoring you. You know, their eyes are all over, and they don't seem to be listening. It's very insulting. And other times they're making a good pretense. They're nodding and going, yeah. But they're still not totally engaged. And then there are others who seem to tone in or hone in when they hear a particular word or a phrase they know is of interest to them. And then there's the really intentional, active listener. And you want to be sometimes the selective listener in a lecture, because there may be points that you really understand, and if your attention goes in and out, when they're dealing with the points you understand, perhaps you're taking a little break, and then selectively you hear about a definition, a concept, an illustration, and that's the time where you really focus in. So whether you're in office hours, a networking meeting, a group study, you want to be thinking of who are good listeners so that you can have an opportunity to talk through the material, whether you're a good listener, and how you're going to set up the conditions for a study group or just a peer-to-peer interaction so that you have the best conditions for studying. And so we're talking about the direct benefits of enhanced listening and note-taking. If you're on the cusp of a B+ and you're looking for an A-, or if you're at the D- level and looking for that solid D, you might look at the lecture notes and the note-taking as one way to pick up the extra couple of points you don't have. And so one benefit, in addition to less stress and more effective learning, is a direct benefit from using good lecture notes to the grades and perhaps to papers. Because frequently, if you will go back to the syllabus and the notes and look at the emphasis that is placed on particular topics, the kinds of papers you should write or the types of projects or presentations you might select will become very clear, and you'll understand really what to do. You take that, talk to the GSI or the professor, and then you have a clearer picture of what to do, and that then saves you time, saves you energy, makes your reading easier to get through, makes your note-taking easier to get to, and the final project is less stressful, and you have some time to work on other projects. How many times have you or your friend stumbled into lecture after being up till 2 or 3 in the morning? You haven't eaten breakfast, you don't know whether your other notes are, maybe you don't even have a pencil, the slides were up but you didn't look at them, so you're not in a particularly good place to process information, let alone listen to it. And so the goal is to reduce all the challenges, get some sleep, have some breakfast, maybe some protein, at least get some walking in, some exercise, so you're in peak physical condition to listen. You know, when you take a test, you get direct, concrete, visible feedback about the type of question that you answered incorrectly. But when you're listening, you could go for months listening in an inaccurate, incomplete way, not paying attention to your notes, and then when it's time to learn these notes, you really don't have any feedback about how good or bad the notes were ongoing, and so you're stuck with material that you can't use, and probably you're trying to use the information, and you get information overload just before a test. So again, if you're rushed, if you're ill, you've really got to see if you want to use somebody else's notes because your energy level, you just may be not up to par. And so students may think of putting off a test if they've been ill, but they might not think of brushing up on their listening skills if they've been ill. So sleeping through a lecture, maybe you get points for being there, but you don't get any real learning. Another place of self-awareness is to take 2 different courses. Look at the notes that you're taking from that course, from each course, and decide, are my notes accurate? Are they complete? Are they relevant to what's going on in my test taking or the papers or the reading I have to do? And what can I do to ratchet each of those courses up? one thing that you can do to see how accurate your note-taking is and how good your memory is to take notes, maybe wait 3 hours, 5 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, but within a brief amount of time, take a blank piece of paper and write down everything you remember from that lecture. Use bullet points, use diagrams, graphs, whatever you can do to shortcut the process. See how much you remember. Now the data is, for listening, is that if you listen to a lecture and people ask you about it a time after, you probably only remember 50%. And then if we delay and delay, you only remember 50% of the 50%. So you want to review as soon as you can the information that would be covered in a lecture. Once you say to yourself or write down the main ideas and some facts and details and examples, you then take that paper and compare it to your lecture notes or the slides. What that does is it raises your curiosity, how well did I do? It focuses your attention on what you know and what you don't know, and it becomes clear to you how much you remember or don't remember. And you begin to self-motivate if you're interested in that extra half point or those extra facts and examples that you give on an essay test, that you become more aware and you become more focused on really previewing and reviewing your notes. So, how much do you actually learn during lecture? Here you are, perhaps you're in lecture 2-3 hours a week. If that time is wasted, you're tired, you're stressed, and you don't know what you're talking about. If that time is used for you to take in learning, to process ideas, and to set the stage for further reading and study, then you're up a leg. So even if you ratchet up your listening for only half the lecture, you're probably going to get some learning done. Now, when people, students specifically, are able to use the lecture notes to learn, or the slides to learn, that becomes an important element and a stepping stone to doing homework assignments and problem sets. Very frequently, with the students I work with, they're in lecture, they feel they're learning, and then whether they've read or not, they go directly to those long, tedious, but highly relevant problem sets. And the feeling is, if I could do the problem, I know it. Well, you know it at that time, and you might be using the book or your notes to solve the problem. On the test, however, or in a class participation or discussion, you have to have it in your brain, accessible on demand. And you want to speak in a fluid way or have the capacity to solve a problem with speed and accuracy under stressful conditions. So one thing about learning your notes is being able to repeat, write the data in your notes before doing problem sets, and then once you've done a number of problems for your homework, perhaps you want to take one of those problems and see if you could do it without looking, so that every time you're reviewing your notes or the problem sets, you're probably reviewing for the test, you're giving yourself an aid to memory and retention, and you're increasing your capacity to integrate information from one lecture to another lecture to another lecture. And it is that integration that helps you when you have to apply all the information on a test, especially when you really have to have formulas under your command. If not totally memorized, they need to be accessed easily. Another thing you can do is see if you can just note down those formulas from memory just once or twice a week, just to enhance your memory. You may be a great listener and learn lots during that lecture. You're connecting the ideas, you can remember some details and examples, but then again, you might not be the best listener in the world. And if you're a visual learner, you find that you learn best from reading, from looking at pictures and diagrams, even from watching the speaker, then you need especially to preview the slides, the readings, maybe the table of contents of a chapter, maybe the summaries and the abstracts, just to get your frame of reference so that you might visualize or use some images when you're then hearing a lecture and trying to record the notes. So if you have a skill that puts you at a disadvantage, and visual skills are very important, but they may put you in a disadvantage in a lecture, you want to bring those strengths to bear before, during, and after the lecture. Many students just agonize when they have to take noteworthy notes, useful notes, relevant notes, when they're reading. This becomes especially acute if you're doing a complicated research paper, a long paper, a paper about which you don't know too much. You become overwhelmed with information. In order to take good notes from reading, it is essential to use some of the aids that we talked about in terms of reading and other test-taking procedures. You want to raise questions. Why are you reading and what are you taking notes about? Do you need the big idea concept? Do you need classic examples or quotes that relate to the lecture? Are you just needing an overview of the style, the characterization that's portrayed in this reading? So you need to decide what it is you need to take notes on. If you don't, if you just have a general topic, what happens is you become totally overwhelmed because you're not specifying what you need from the reading, and you may be taking copious notes to no avail. You may be rewriting everything. So if you're taking notes, you want to read a section, visualize it, say it to yourself, and then write the notes in your words and check back. It may be that you just need to refer back, then you just put pages down. With so many people using tablets and readers, an important thing about highlighting is very important. What you want to do if you're going to highlight is read the section that you're going to highlight. Again, say it in your own words and then highlight it. You don't want to just say, oh, that's important, because the thing you remember is, oh, that was important, that was important, that was important, but you might not remember what it said that was important. Another part of taking notes is the capacity to organize them and to have them accessible. So when working with doctoral students, master's level students who are writing very complicated papers or doing research, they do file after file, they can't find it, it's not dated, it's not classified. So the best thing to do when you're taking notes for a paper is set up your note-taking system, even if you're just putting the date in front of it. The date and the topic, that becomes your major folder. You might want to use Dropbox, whatever it is to get you able to access the material easily and not lose focus. Another thing that helps people take notes is there are times when readings are quite complicated and they don't really show up very well on a computer screen. So for some people, it's necessary to print the notes out, the reading out, so that when you take notes, you might be able to just circle a section and say essential example. You may be able to do some visual things that help you remember and access it more easily. So we want to think about what exactly do you do when you want to prepare for a lecture, when you're in the lecture, and after the lecture. So we're going to look at three areas or times that you would attend a lecture. In addition, we're going to be looking at what are some steps to help you process the information and retain it and then use it. So before the lecture, we're talking about making up some questions. We're thinking about looking at the syllabus, looking at the table of contents, looking at previous lectures to see what kind of questions or trends you were talking about, and also looking at the kinds of slides. So you want to prepare specifically. For a warm-up, a great thing to do before going to the next lecture is to look at what was done in the previous lecture and ask questions about how does this lecture compare to the next one? Are we increasing the detail that we're looking at, or are we going on to a new topic? You want to get in early, perhaps have a healthy drink or snack just to rev you up. Perhaps you have to just relax, take a deep breath, that 3 minutes just to prepare yourself, relax, get a positive image of yourself as a good listener or a productive student. Then again, you're more ready to listen. While you're listening, do everything you can not to distract yourself. Put that phone away. Turn it off. Do not text. It's so easy to do, but it's so distracting. And if you're in a course where the material is so difficult, that's especially necessary. So you want to get close to the speaker if you can, at least position yourself where other people aren't talking or distracting you. You want to be able to come in with some questions or key points that you really need to know. You might have a notebook where you're having questions on the side, or you may bring sticky notes. If you're doing multiple slides, then you might be able to put sticky notes. Many of the slides that I look at, especially in the science courses, are extremely dense. You're getting 30 or 40 slides of very complicated new material. You have no framework. In those courses, it's especially important to look at the slides before. Then, it may be that for some slides, you need to print a complicated slide out, and as the professor is talking, perhaps look at one part of the slide at a time so you can have increased focus. And of course, many students really enjoy color coding some of the slides so they see the red is the main idea and the green are examples. Again, as in reading, it's really important to be listening to the structure of language. How does the professor or the instructor or the lecturer break up the lecture? Are they talking about pro-con? Are they saying on the one hand, on the other hand? Are they doing contradictions? Are they saying however, although? So you want to, as you would in reading, use catchphrases and signal words to, again, get your selective attention honed in and to give you a framework of what is the structure of this lecture. Are we dealing with sequences? Are we dealing with cause and effect? Are we causing with main ideas and increasingly difficult details and examples? And for some people who are great note takers or want to cut down on the time, they may decide that to have a little legend of abbreviations or key ways of bulleting their information. So how you take notes becomes more acute in some courses than the other. Now, for some people with slow processing or poor handwriting or poor auditory skills, there are certain aids. One of the aids that many students feel is quite useful is a live scribe. It's a pen that records and has a particular type of pen and paper that's coded so that when you're writing the notes, the lecture is being recorded. You then stop. When you want, you can connect the pen to the computer. You will get a printout of the notes. And then if on the paper you point out a certain section, you will automatically hear that section read back to you. So this aid costs, I think, under $100. It can be shared by people sometime, but I think for some students it's a very worthwhile investment. Many of the word processing programs have note-taking parts to it, and I think for whatever software you use, it's worth investigating, perhaps using it in the easiest course just to get used to it, and then deciding what kind of aid is best. In the medical schools or other professional schools, students are sometimes allowed to opt out of lecture, and the lectures are videotaped, and students who are slow or distracted or just don't like sitting with a group of people are using these videotaped lectures. One of the things that happens when you do this is that you may feel that you want to just get through them, okay? Get them over. And it feels good because I did 5 at a time, or I did 5 very quickly. The problem is that, especially if you're just listening to them and not doing any learning activities while the lecture's going on, you don't learn. You get through them, you go over the notes, but you haven't learned enough. So the key to doing that kind of learning, whether it's online or just coming to a videotaped lecture, what you want to do is stop after each major idea, see if you can visualize it, write it in your own words, draw a picture, identify some critical details, and then go on. And take breaks every 20 minutes, because if you're doing it on your own, the chances that you get distracted, don't pay attention, and fritter away the time is high. And what happens is you put the time in, but it hasn't been productive. So the emphasis, whether you're listening in lecture or watching a videotaped lecture, is to put learning activities, interaction, action-oriented things, writing, visualizing, talking to yourself, so that you are helping your memory and setting the stage so that when you leave that lecture, you can remember it and then integrate it on the next go-round. And then after the lecture, what you want to do is make sure that within 24 to 48 hours, you spend at least 20 minutes doing a review of the lecture. Again, you can use a blank page type of exercise where you're just writing things down. You can cover up the lecture and talk it to yourself. You can organize it as you go through it. You can identify the definitions and the specific pieces of information, but you've got to do something active, because if you have the big picture and you look at that lecture, just read and reread, it's like, you know, throwing, having flypaper out, you know, whatever hits the flypaper, that sets. But unless you do something action-oriented, it doesn't work. It may be that you need to find somebody to study with. It may be that you need to purchase notes or share notes with somebody else, but you've got to do periodic review. The best ritual for your hardest course, where your grade is on the line, is to at least have 20 minutes after each lecture, and then once a week look at all the lectures so that you've recycled and integrated. When we were talking about reading, we talked about SQ4R as a tried and true strategy for reading, and the same types of procedures that you use for reading for ensuring that you're processing information is to use the same kinds of things in listening. And we tried to use SQ4R for reading, listening, test preparation, even paper writing. You have one set of steps which can be applied and adapted to the various study skills. This gives you greater confidence, greater practice, and greater chance that you're going to remember, integrate, and use the information. So at the first step, you're surveying. So that means you're surveying before, you're looking at all the slides, you're looking at the reading. The next step would be questioning, set up some critical questions that you think are answered before and then during the lecture. And the next thing is when you're listening, you're focused on answering questions, finding the definitions, the key terms, the examples. How does this example illustrate the main idea? What examples are non-examples? When you're doing this during your listening, you then go on and you write answers to questions, or you make up questions. So after every lecture, one way of reviewing the material is to write questions that are similar to the questions that might be on an exam. Now, you might not be able to do this at the beginning when you haven't had a course, or when the professor has not provided sample questions. But you can design a question and ask a GSI or a professor if this question is similar to the kind of questions that will be asked. That kind of process gets you to practice the kind of detail that you might not see if you were just rereading your notes. So when you make up a multiple choice question, you might say which one of these things is true and find the one thing in your lecture that's the non-example. So this idea of asking and answering questions and then reciting the answers to yourself and then writing the chart of information is very important. Once you decide what the critical ideas are, what the critical formulas are, if you're taking a test on a blue book, your memory is faulty, you get stressed, you can't remember. The minute you get the blue book and the inside of the cover, you write down the key points so it's always there for you and you don't have to figure out what's going on. And then you can sort of outline what you think is the critical aspects. Mind mapping is something that many people used in junior high and high school and then forget about at the college level. And the idea of mind mapping is to create visuals of ideas. Frequently it was used for brainstorming, so you would just sort of have an information dump about all the ideas and then maybe put them in sequence or organize them in certain categories. But the idea of drawing diagrams and making charts and mapping out the sequence of information is very critical at the college level when you have a mass of information that can be so overwhelming that if you start charting it out, whether it's Greek mythology, humanities, or a science process, once you do the conversion of words to pictures, you're using a different side of the brain and you're able to really remember it. And for some people who are visual learners, it becomes especially important. Some people enjoy the doodling or the writing. The kind of paper they use is important. Sometimes they want to put white paper or old newspaper on, with masking tape on walls and really draw something big, because if you're into a very detailed organism, you might want that opportunity. Other people might use colored pencils. Other people really want to just focus on details, because if they don't see that detail and its relationship to the whole, it's very hard to evoke the information on a test. And when they talk about one picture being worth 1,000 words in these kinds of situations, that's where it is. So there's something called the blank page exercise. It doesn't want to be a blank mind exercise, it wants to be a blank page exercise. That is, you take that blank piece of paper and you write out an outline, definitions, a drawing from memory, and then go back. You can do this before you review your notes, you can do this after you review your notes, and you can do this prior to test taking. What it does is ensure you or show you what you know or don't know and where you have to fill in the gaps. Working with residents, medical residents who have a mass of information, sometimes they are listening to lectures, maybe they make a chart of it, maybe they copy a chart, and what happens is, by making the chart, it feels like you've done something really great. You see the whole, maybe you've color-coded it, it's neatly written. The problem is if you say a day later, turn the chart over and write it from memory, there's a lot of slippage. It's amazing. So you might have your written notes and use a whiteboard to then write out what you think you remember. Go back, identify what you didn't learn, turn it over, visualize it, say it to yourself a couple times, take a different color pen, and then fill in the information on the whiteboard again. So this allows you to see how you build up your knowledge base. So think about when you're learning to an onion, but you're learning from the core out, learning the main ideas of what you remembered, adding a little, adding a little, adding a little. So you only do this with the most detailed, critical courses. You spend the time, but that's different. This is active learning, not just going over and over your notes. You want to use these listening skills in discussions and meetings because, again, if you're meeting on a regular basis or just before a test, you don't want to waste your time. So if you have a group, have people design a question after each lecture, and everybody brings a question in, and then you're focused on what you think are the critical aspects, and it's tied, your note-taking is tied to the test-taking or the paper writing. The same kind of thing goes with listening skills when you're working with counselors and advisors. What you'd want to do is restate what they said. You want to write it down and maybe email a summary to them so you have it, because you want to make sure you have clear, accurate directions and explanations. So here's where your listening and speaking skills can hugely impact the amount of learning and the amount of time you save when you go to study. So going to office hours and just showing people your notes, asking what the questions might look like, and then taking that information to review your notes and make practice test questions has a direct relationship to your ability to get an extra point or 2 or 3 on the test. So in summary, students have greater control than they think about during lectures by preparing, really focusing, and then reviewing their notes. Also, you can improve by focusing on one course at a time. So if you're having trouble in a course, and that's the place either you want to get an extra few points on the test, or you need a couple of points, one is always going to office hours. 2, if you've got some challenges, touching base with services for students with disabilities. If you're feeling tension and stress, and you're crying or falling apart, or even if you want some traditional stress management strategies as finals come, you might want to go contact CAPS or a health service. And if your notes are getting out of hand and you're writing papers, then you might want to go to the Sweetland Writing Center. So we want to integrate, whether it's listening or reading, all the different services that are provided here at the university. And so identify one goal. Do you need to rewrite some just definitions? Do you need to stop rewriting your notes in an aimless way? And what are the 3 things that you can do to enhance your listening? Thank you very much. I have one other thing to say. I have a book called A Study Tip a Day Gets You an A, and these are study tips written in 140 characters or less. If you have an iPhone, you can go to the App Store, and it's a free download. So this is my gift to the community, and I appreciate you being here, and thank you very much.